what could I offer? Here I am. And what else could I live for? Here I am. It's written on my heart, Lord. Here I am. I've come. You showed me mercy. Your love and truth came down. Troubles mounted, oh, and sin was all around. You gave me life again. You said when I was good as dead. You offered up your life, said, here I am. Your body was prepared, here I am. It's written in your word, Lord, here I am. I come. You offered up your life, said, here I am. Your body was prepared, here I am. It's written in your word, Lord, here I am. I've come. May all who seek you, may they be glad in you. God, you help us, though we are weak and poor. For great is the Lord, great is the Lord, who offered up his life, who came in sacrifice. His name is Jesus Christ. He's come.
Hello, good morning. It's Friday. Thanks for joining us here for our last session of our virtual summer school. It's been a fantastic week. I felt a real sense of community through this online format, much like we have every year at our usual summer school in Arbroath. So as a summer school team, we're really thankful for how this has all come together and for all of your eagerness in participating. A reminder that the live chat is down there. I've been enjoying some of your comments a lot, so keep it up. We hope this week has given you some helpful tools to hold on to, like the wheel and the word hand, and helped you think about what rule of life you could introduce into your daily and weekly rhythms so that you can be experiencing God's truth and love more fully in your life and faith. We put out a post yesterday actually on our social medias about the word hand and the scriptures that relate to each finger and teach us about how we connect with the word. We often post things like that and share helpful resources and blog posts. So I'd encourage you to keep up with us beyond this week by following us on our socials on Instagram, Twitter, and our Facebook, and go to our website where we have a bunch of helpful resources and regular blog posts. So before we get to our summer school challenge submissions, which I hope you're excited for, we've got a couple more pet photos that we couldn't get in yesterday. So here's just two of them. This is a 10-week-old Flynn in St Andrews from Abby and Xander. He must have really enjoyed Phil's talk on Wednesday about the word. He's digging right in. Next, we've got Mara on the Isle of Lewis. This one's from Rachel. Just before they head to the supermarket, you can see Mara's getting her PPE on, very wise. And afterwards the photo on the right must be from afterwards when she gets her snack. Okay, that's all the pet photos we got, just a couple. Now it's time to have some fun together looking through your submissions to the summer school challenge I gave you, where I asked you to send in pictures and videos of you spoofing and replicating movie moments and posters. To start us off, actually, we've got a video, and then we'll get in the photos, so I'll let you watch that. See if you can guess what it's recreating. So, of course, Lion King there, that's from Ailey in Stirling. She did that for a film recreation round of a quiz she made, so thanks for that. So now for your submissions. I've saved the winner for the end, so if yours comes up before then, you'll know they're not the winner, but it's not really about that. I had such a laugh looking at all of these for the first time yesterday, so I hope you enjoy them as much as I did. Of course, I decided arbitrarily which I thought was best, but some of the things I was looking for or I appreciated are, of course, likeness, that they look closely similar, and especially creativity in like set design and costume replication and the props that they use, stuff like that. So first we've got from Jordan and Rachel in Glasgow doing Wayne's World. I think the likeness is impeccable with this one. I love the wooden spoons and the pan as the guitar and drumsticks. But the highlight for me, the subtle highlight, is Big Rona at the bottom on top of the world. Their stuffed seal who we met yesterday. What a chubby boy. So next we've got a great collection from Philip and Stephen in Edinburgh. They had a lot of ideas, so we'll see those. First is La La Land. Yeah, it's very lovely. I love the idea for the background, the setting on their roof. You know, they had to choose between a lamppost or a skyline. I think they made a wise decision there, so that's a good one. Next, we've got Juno. Maybe Philip's lockdown diet isn't going so well in this one, but there you go. That's another great one. And the next one we've got is Fight Club from Philip and Stephen as well, but I won't talk about that one. That's pretty shocking, isn't it? But cool. So next we've got Colin from Edinburgh. He was getting a bit cheeky with this one. He made one that he didn't even feature in. So you can see that there's Phil in the middle and his two sidekicks, Darren and Tom. But I'll let Colin off with this one because you can see he's got the wheel in the background. So yeah, well done for that. Next we've got an ensemble cast. Next we've got Emma and Claire in Glasgow. Maybe you'll recognize this one. They qualified in their email that they didn't actually meet up and get this close. They edited it, so don't worry. It's The Fault in Our Stars. A sweet submission here of them breaking down distances, looking close, but so far. So Colin thought he was going to get away with it. Here's one from Dave in Inverness. Colin looking crazed, like a madman. It's pretty nuts what a couple of weeks without flour can do to a middle-aged man in lockdown. Looking like a nut job here. Okay, next we've got an ensemble cast using the most advanced CGI to smoothly bring together people from 3 different locations. Adrian in Switzerland made this. As soon as self-isolation was on the horizon, he bought himself a PS4. So the inspiration for this one is the video game Fortnite. Adrian is the one on the right. You can see some things look quite big on him. Some things look quite small, like his hammer, maybe not as impressive as the one in the poster. Okay, after that we've got Dr. Grace Doolittle, sent in from Berwick. These are all animals that she actually has. I wonder if Grace maybe speaks to her animals just as much as Dr. Doolittle does. She's got a lot of love for them. Okay, after that we've got David in St Andrews spoofing Avatar. This is a good opportunity for me to get my feelings about Avatar off my chest. I've had the same conversation with a lot of people about this. You know, there's a new one coming out and people aren't very enthused. Oh, the old one was pants, blah, blah, blah. Listen, I don't want to hear it because when it came out, we all loved it. And I know that you loved it. I'm actually on my phone instead of laptop, so I've got Peter here moving the script for me. This guy, you might hear laughing, he talks about how pants it is. He saw it 6 times in the cinema. So we all love this film. So thanks to David and St Andrews. Give it some respect. Okay, next we got Dave in Edinburgh. He went for Finding Nemo, Finding Dave. I think I would like a turtle that had Dave's face on it. I'd find that sweet. This film's actually a good example for us at the moment, isn't it? About how an unnecessary journey can cause a lot of hassle. There's a bit of satire for you. Okay, so lastly, this one is my winner. I think it's great on so many levels. It's playing with an iconic film. It's a really close replication, and I really enjoy seeing the kind of prop replacement, turning the whole idea of the poster and the film on its head. You know, with the Bible instead of the magazine, the Nerf gun instead of the pistol, pack of cards instead of cigarettes. So yeah, that's Philip and Stephen, another one that they created. So yeah, that's my winner. I think that's great. So thanks so much for all the effort all of you guys put into that. And yeah, just for how much fun I had looking through all those. I hope you guys enjoyed that as well. So yeah, thanks for getting stuck in with that. So that's all for information, announcements, and silly nonsense. So I'm just going to bring on Colin, who's speaking to us today.
Morning.
Morning, Colin. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good stuff, everyone. I enjoyed that.
So, Colin, for people who don't know you, who are you?
Yeah, I'm Colin. Married to Louise, 3 kids. Work with the Navigators here in Edinburgh with students. Yeah, I get to work with Ben every day. It's wonderful.
Yeah. What's been your lockdown highlight, Colin, or highlights?
Oh, thanks for asking. Basically, sitting in my tracksuit trousers, committing cybercrime, and not having to talk to anyone or leave the house.
And what's your favorite video conferencing software, Colin?
Oh, Zoom hands down, but it's going to become Teams very soon, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, I like to call it Dreams rather than Teams, but Zoom is pretty good as well.
Living the dream.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Thanks for the laugh, Colin. Yeah, I'll just pray for you before you speak to us. Thanks. Yeah, Lord, just pray for your hand over Colin these next 30 minutes as he speaks to us. Thanks that you're involved in practical things like technology, and you're helping that to run smoothly, and pray you'll bless that also. Pray for us all watching at home, listening, that we'd really connect to what's going on and just have our hearts open to be challenged to impact our lives. Amen. Cheers, Colin.
Yeah, well, a couple of things before we start here. The first one is I've noticed during every talk that you can see how many people are watching on the bottom left of your YouTube screen. And actually, I did realize there was a couple of points when you could visibly see the numbers dropping over the last few days. For example, when Roz did her dance, there was a bit of a dip. When Phil said he was basically worshipping Ben Shepherd, that a few people checked out there, weren't happy with that. And yesterday, after Darren alienated anyone who wasn't a Celtic fan and Dominic Cummings, the numbers took a big hit. So Tom and Judy, you were great. But yeah. And so just on that topic, so the comments I know can be distracting. So a bit of advice, if you want to click the enlarge screen, the comments disappear and you won't get to see Hamish trolling me. So yeah. Final thing for a start in earnest. Dobre rano, krasnym, obywatelom Slovenska. Rule of life. Oh, okay. Right, so as we start, we've looked at the different parts of the wheel so far. The center, Christ the center, the horizontal axis, loving others, and outreach, prayer and word. And now we come to the rim, the outside of it. And a lot of people talk about this being the rim of obedience. Here we've got the whole of life shaped and submitted to Christ. And I want to begin this morning by just affirming that in the Christian life, everything matters. I can't say that clearly enough. Everything matters in the Christian life. And I want in particular to say firmly that following Jesus it is not just about conversion and then having a spiritual experience in a secluded and a private space. Because when we do that, we always end up living a double life. The life ends up becoming divided. As you can see by the slide I'm about to show, what ends up happening is you have on one hand the Christian life, which is spiritual thing, which is prayer, Christian friends, Bible study, fellowship, quiet time can be on one hand, and then the other hand is normal life, which is things like science, the body, commerce, non-Christian friends, household tasks, politics. And if we have those in a separate existence, it just doesn't work. And what actually ends up happening is the Christian life really shrinks. And I've seen this so many times over the years, is that it ends up becoming a corner in your life where everything else is going on. And then sort of appended to this is the Christian life. And the problem with this is that life is just not big enough, that you can't live that life. It's just not big enough. It leaves so much of my existence untouched by Jesus. And you see, God didn't come to humanity, into the world, and to me just to have a devotional slot. And you can see it in the scriptures. The scriptures don't start with creation and then end with disembodied souls in the sky. That's not the message of the Bible. The Bible starts with creation and it ends with creation. And everything between is relevant there. So it ends with new creation, where every action is earthy, just like in the original creation. And this involves a restored humanity. And it's so important to see that the end point for us is not a superhumanity where we don't need bodies, where we're excused from things like breathing or feeling or anything, or doing anything useful or fun. The truth is that Jesus came as a true human so that we could be truly human, not like a permanent ghost with better manners. That's not what he imagined for us at all. So in the new creation, the new humanity, everything is important, even the littlest details of life. So how should we think about our lives in the real world just now? What does it mean to be connected to Jesus, and then for Jesus to flow through us into every detail of human life? Well, many people see this connection as a bit like, as I said, like having a corner where there's a bit, you go to Jesus some point in the day and you have almost like a power up or a spiritual boost so that you can get on with your things in the world and then report back to him, a bit like a pit stop, spiritual pit stop. But as we've said, this dual life is forbidden by the Bible. We have one life in Christ, only one life. And we can't think of the Christian life as being separate. So every act is actually a Christian act, because in every act we're joined to Jesus at the center. That's what this wheel is meant to illustrate for us. So this morning I want to explore what all that means, what it's like for every part of our life to be connected to Jesus. And I want to show in particular that the Christian life doesn't result in some things being labeled valuable and other things being labeled insignificant or even a necessary evil. Everything matters and everything has value. So as a kind of starter question, if I was to kind of ask you what gives our acts in creation or in life meaning, what would you say? I think most of us, being children or products of our age, we would say productivity, or the outcome it gives, or maybe for a Christian we'd say the spiritual outcome. And that's another way of saying that the ends justify the means. That's the measure by what's useful, what gives an act meaning these days. The only important thing really is what we get out at the end. And I really want to challenge this assumption. And I want to do that by looking at 2 verses of scripture, and I want to unpack that. I want to argue that every act is valuable to God because he's made it valuable. And the Christian life is thankfully living a normal life to him, and it involves all of the details. So let's get into Romans 12, 1-2. Okay. Therefore, there it goes. Therefore, I exhort you, brothers and sisters, in light of the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Well, I want us to know a few things, notice a few things as we read these verses. And the first is the opening phrase, which is, therefore, I exhort you. So Paul is referring to everything he said up to this point in Romans. And basically, I can paraphrase what he's saying by the use of this phrase, therefore, I exhort you. He wants to urge and encourage them to something. And he's saying, if what I've said for the last 11 chapters is true, and you've grasped any of it, then you will be moved. It will change the way you think, and it will change the way that you behave. So we can ask, what is the force behind this change? What powers this new movement, and how should it change the way we think? Well, I think there's two phrases here which helps us into the right way of thinking. And the first one is in light of God's mercies. The second is present your bodies as living sacrifices. But the first one, we'll go back to that. Firstly, mercies. Now, I've done a little bit of tidying up here because your English version might say mercy. And you might think I'm splitting hairs here, but the Greek word is actually plural and not singular. So I've changed the text to say mercies. But why is this important? Well, I think there is not just one mercy in the Christian life. We often think of mercy being a singular thing because we understand it as based on a past act of Jesus, or the past act when we became Christians. So we think of the mercy of God, and often subconsciously we think of it as a singular. And whilst the whole base of our faith is one act, and I include in one act Jesus coming, living, suffering, dying, rising, ascending, and returning. And yes, I think we should think of them all as one event or one movement. We don't receive one experience of mercy. See, mercies and compassions are really important for us as Christians, because the reality is we are born, or we are brought into a stream of mercy when we come to Jesus. It's a whole new life of compassion. We're actually birthed into mercy and compassion. It's our experience of life. As an analogy, our two boys, we've got a girl and two boys. The two boys were actually born in a birthing pool at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary up the road. So their life began surrounded completely with water. However, after a minute, they were sort of fished out and they took their first breath of air. But for us, we are born into mercy, and we never leave that environment of mercy. We're never fished out to breathe something else, ever. We're in a perpetual state of receiving mercy from a well whose flow never stops, never disrupted or terminated. So that one act, or movement of Christ, it unleashes into our lives God's favor and compassion. And this is absolutely vital. If you think of God's mercy as something you've only received once in the past, then you might think you have to work up gratitude every day to show how grateful you are for what God has done. And that's not the picture we get at all. Our life is to be a constant breathing in, responding to the flow of mercy which comes into our lives, not the response to something that we received or experienced in the past. So it is something accomplished in the past, but it's being poured out today. And it's poured out today so that you might put it on and walk around in it, so that you might breathe it in and breathe it out, so that you might wake up in it every morning and then go to bed in it at night. It's meant to suffuse and encompass the whole of your life. That's mercies, not mercy. Second, we can ask, how are we to immerse ourselves in this mercy? And here's where Paul charges us to present our bodies. Now, I think this is where it gets really interesting. And there are a few things to say about this. First, it is about sacrifice. And as you might have noticed or guessed, it's referring to Old Testament sacrifice, the Old Testament sacrificial system of presenting animals or grain or food to be poured out or burned on the altar. And central to this idea is participation. In the Old Testament, particular offerings would be placed before the worshiper, and they would put their hands on it, and they would identify with that offering before it's presented on the altar. And the symbolism there is that as I put my hands on it, I'm saying, as this is being offered, it's me that's being offered. It's being offered on my behalf, but it's really me that's being offered. The statement is really clear. I'm not just giving an item, I'm really giving or offering myself. And so this verse in Romans 12 is actually saying, as God births us and keeps us in the flow of his mercy, then the response is for us to give ourselves as an offering to him. So you might ask this, Why is sacrifice needed at all as a Christian? Because hasn't Jesus' sacrificial death accomplished everything that the Old Testament required for sacrifice? And I would say to that, good question. And the answer is yes and no. Why? Well, you see, actually, there was more than one type of sacrificial offering in the Old Testament. There were offerings which atoned for sin on one hand, but there are also another set of offerings which were thank offerings. And this is oversimplifying it and putting it a bit crudely. But these basic two groups of offerings, sin offerings and thank offerings. And we often equate Jesus' death to the sin offering, and it is. But it's important here for us to understand that Paul is thinking of both, and that Jesus fulfills both. Where the sin offering was completed by Jesus, it ceased because Jesus' life was offered on the cross. But in contrast to that, and this is really key, the thank offering continues. I think this is an amazing thought. We're thinking of what Jesus' sacrifice means. So Jesus does two things in his death. He completes the sin offering, he fulfills that, but he also fulfills the thank offering. And he does that in his life. And I think you can put it this way: God always intended when he gave Jesus that the sin offering should stop. But he never intended that the thank offering should stop. In fact, he intended that it should continue. And I would argue that he even intended that it would multiply. How does that work? I think it's simple: through us. And this is getting into some deep and wonderful theology about our union with Christ, that basically as Christ comes to us and continues his thank offering to the Father, he does it through us. Actually, he does it right now in the details of our life, inside this skin, under this hair, with these hands and fingernails, with these lips and this next breath. He intends the thank offering to be continued through us. It's a perpetual thing which multiplies, it never ceases. And he brings us into that offering of thanks to his Father. So yeah, Jesus' death was a death at one point, but his life is a life into eternity with us and through us, a life that continues through me and through you. So Thanksgiving's multiplied as his Spirit enters us and we join with him forever. I just want to ask, how do you feel about that description of life for us? Jesus didn't just come to stop us from sinning. He did with the offering of himself and death, but he came that our lives would become a stream of thanks as he offers himself in life as well. And I think that's why verse 2 says specifically that it's our bodies that we presented as living sacrifices. Here, the emphasis is not on dead animals for sin, but on living bodies for thanksgiving. You see, this is about the Spirit making our whole life a life of thanks, an outlet for the compassion and the mercy of God, a place where we energize every little act with gratitude to him, because he's pouring out his mercy to us as we live and breathe. And I think that's why, just in terms of translation, you can see, if you look at this later, you can see that the translation is spiritual worship. It could also be reasonable worship or logical worship. It's because in the light of God's mercy, it just makes sense. And it's a very spiritual thing as well. And I'd add that this tidies up a huge problem that we often have in our minds. We don't divide body and spirit. They were never meant to be treated as opposites. And here Paul is talking about a life which is as bodily as you can imagine. It assumes work, rest, play, breakfast, brushing your teeth, rugby if you're into that, knitting, sex, Snapchat, watching TV, even things like changing the ink in your printer. It involves all of these things, but it's about as spiritual as we can imagine as well. Why? It's because the Holy Spirit is joining you to Jesus, who's the perfect offering to the Father. So, whilst we're saying that the Son's thanksgiving offering through me and you, we can ask, how does this make what we do in our bodies important? I just want to pause. There's a picture that might actually help this, just to picture it briefly. So, if we think of the original creation, that picture on the left, as God, us going into the world, and the command is to fill the earth and subdue it, basically to care for creation in the presence of God. That's what the first one illustrates. But then what the fall does is it takes us out of God's presence, and then what we begin to do is just do things. We exploit the world. We do things on our own without reference to God, without consulting him. The last image is really what the cross does for us, what Christ does for us. See, the cross, it rebuilds that triangle, puts us back into the presence of God, brings us forgiveness of sins, and then it brings us into the flow of mercy which comes from that cross. But it doesn't stop there. It pushes us out into the world to have that restored role of caring for the world, so that everything that we do in creation is thanks, and that ultimately it becomes an offering back to the Father. I think that's a nice picture of what Christ's work does for us. It puts us in the stream of his mercy, it pushes us out in worship, and then the offering comes back to the Father. That's the life we're called to live now. I think that's huge. So as we move on from that, last thing I want to say is I think it's significant also that whilst Paul is talking about a life that's characterized by this thankful breathing in and out of God's mercy, that we don't miss the point that it is a sacrifice. So we often hear the word sacrifice as being negative, and that's because it has the implication of cost. In our day, we might feel that this restricts our freedom of choice, and it sounds like oppression, but it's meant to be nothing like that at all. But I think this is important to dwell on and pause on this for a second, because in our day, it's easy to hear what I've said, everything that I've just said, and conclude that worship can be anything that we do in the body, and that grace frees us to do whatever we want, and then we just call it worship. I think that's a real common problem that we face as Christians in our generation just now. I can do whatever I want because I can consider it worship, and grace gives us freedom. Well, what do we answer to that? Well, I think it brings us to the final word, and it's the word of worship. And I want to ask, can I do whatever I want and call it worship? And I think the answer is no, because worship implies that our lives, our acts have to be harnessed or sacrificed for something greater. Whatever worship involves, it must assume sacrifice or submission of what I have or what I do to something greater. Otherwise, it's just not worship. If I'm basically doing what I want and calling it worship, I haven't understood worship at all. It's not really worship. Why? It's simply because I'm satisfying my own appetites. And really what I'm saying, there's nothing greater than my appetite. Nothing greater in what I do with my choices, my possessions, or my resources. Nothing greater than what I want. And I think this simply reduces the idea of worship to consumption. Value is only found in the experience I gain from consuming something or someone. And so for me to say I worship God, but use my possessions, time, emotional, intellectual resources as a consumer, I think that makes no sense. And what the second verse urges us to think about is that the transformation is about a renewal of our mind. And it's not just the thinking part of us, it incorporates the whole worldview, the way that we process and see the world. And I think it's the great challenge for us as Christians at this point in time. Are we true worshippers, or are we consumer worshippers? So what is a true worshipper? I think it's a worshipper that recognizes that an act or a thing or a person has greater value than in the experience that's provided from consuming it. And that value has been given by someone. And I say specifically someone because it's a person. And I think we try as we might, we can't get away from the fact that when we're thankful, we want to thank someone. It's a personal thing. When we're grateful, our impulse is to thank someone. Consuming, on the other hand, only values someone or something in as much as it provides a return as a consumable. And that's not really worship. There's no room there for impulse or thanksgiving, no meditation or appreciation for its real qualities or value. It's just a wipe of the mouth and then a preoccupation for what we can consume next. That's not worship. And this is why Christianity in particular presents a life that's wonderfully unique, a life that sees all things as given to us, for which all things can be received and used in thanks, or done with thanks. Even the most mundane or challenging task, even the most difficult relationship, worship is possible, not because it provides us with a particular return or experience that feeds us, it's because it has a given goodness that we can engage in. Think about a mundane activity like changing your bedding. I hated that job. I think I went through a whole semester as a student without changing my bedding. It was gross, but I hated doing it. Think about that example. Is it merely a means to an end when I'm changing my bedding? Is it what we call a necessary evil? Time I could be spent doing something more rewarding. Well, what gives that value? And you could argue that there's a very legitimate end product there. I get to sleep in bedclothes that I haven't been drooling over for a whole semester. But does that one act alone make it a valuable act. Or we can say the same about cleaning toilets or washing up or admin. I hate that as well, by the way. Or can these really be acts of worship? Is it possible at that moment to make that act something which has its own special goodness, for which you could be genuinely thankful? Can it be God's gift to you that you can offer him back in thanks? Or is it done reluctantly or mechanically because it will just be getting something out of the way so you can get on with what you really want to be doing as a consumer? Or perhaps more seriously, how does it affect the way you think about people? Are there people we treat like a means to an end? It's a really challenging question, challenging for me. Should we be thankful then? Are people are people valuable because they're helpful to us, because they feed us or they help us to achieve our goals in some way? Or do we really appreciate them instead of the return they provide? What about people who aren't very easy to relate to? How about people who are socially don't have much confidence or capabilities? Are they valuable? Do I just relate to them like a consumer, just discard them because they're not useful? Or do I delight in that person because God has put that unique person in front of us in our midst? Does this person's unique givenness move me to treat them with love as a thank you to God? And maybe finally, what about things that are just not easy? Maybe they're painful. Maybe there's situations where we're mistreated or minimized or even abused. Should we be thankful then? And I say this with real care. Abuse is not a gift, and it's not okay. And there are situations that we just need to get out of, and there's injustices that need to be addressed immediately. And when we feel these things, I think it's important to acknowledge there's a certain place for lament and just to cry. We've been thinking about that as a community in Scotland here. I would say think about the Psalms, and I would ask this: does lament or complaint mean that there can't be worship? I think when you look at the Psalms in particular, you see that they're never prized apart. Can we thank God through the tears? The Psalms answer yes. We can worship, absolutely. And can we offer our broken selves in worship? I would say yes. It says that. So I'm not saying that we take something bad and call it good or force a smile, but I am saying this: that you're surrounded and standing in the stream of God's mercy, and therefore thankful worship is still possible. And I would say further that to enjoy the value of God's gifts, it might not soften or resolve a situation, but it will certainly transform our experience of living in that place. And I would add there's something about mercy that sharpens our capacity for gratitude, especially as we suffer. And I don't want to sound trite or say this lightly, but there's something that actually leads us to see the consumer mentality with disgust and just say, I yearn for something good. This is not doing it. So as we kind of move to a close, how do we live this stuff out? And I want to bring us back to our wheel. How do we match this up to what we've been learning and reflecting on this week? I think this is why the wheel, although it's just a tool, it's really helpful. It rightly displays the Christian life as a connected unit where Christ's at the center, and in our lives we're outworking him into the very edges, into the very corners and details of our lives. A life centered on him, but it affects everything. A life ordered to that greater reality that's him in the center. So you've got Christ at the center and you've got the rim. And I think just bringing what we've been learning this week, joining that up as these spokes, the horizontal and the vertical axis, as we engage with him in these things, we're actually doing two things. We're going in two different directions. We're communing and we're participating. And notice that we're doing that in two different directions, like the arrows are showing just now. Firstly, as we do these things, we're going towards Christ as an act of pursuing him, valuing him, and getting to know him. But secondly, it goes in the other direction, outward. And this is us participating in what Christ is doing in the world, his life and work in the world. So prayer, scripture, love amongst the lost, and love in the body, they take us both towards Christ and outwards towards the world. And I think these are the anchors. These are kind of the life channels between Christ through us and how we live in the world, the life of thanksgiving and worship. They help to harness and order our lives so that we can willingly sacrifice them to him in true worship. So to end, how does it answer our original question about the value of what we do in life? What does it mean when we press leave later on? We go to work on our computers, or we go to life with the flatmates, or back to bed, or we queue again outside a supermarket, or go as the golf course is open, you might want to play golf. or just turn the TV. Well, it means that the value of what we do doesn't depend just on the productivity or of its return, on the value of its return. Its value comes in its givenness, the fact that God has sanctified it. In other words, he's made it special and valuable because it's come from his hand and he's declared it so. And because Jesus' offering of mercy doesn't just pay for our sins, but invites us into that life of mercy, it transforms everything that we do, every little thing, so that when we join to him, it's an offering gladly back to the Father. I think this changes everything. Everything now is a gift from God and to God, every little action in detail. So we don't go from here awake tomorrow groaning to ourselves like, what do I have to do today? We begin every new thing saying, even in the challenges and the frustrations, even if there is pain and lament, that there's something wonderful here, something given, and it's yet another mercy. And I get to do it with you and for you, Jesus, with a full and thankful heart. Amen. Well, I'm just about to hand you back to Ben. Ben's not expecting this, but there's a couple of things I just wanted to say before you go. So you've heard Phil and Roz and Tom and Judy and Darren this week, and we're all part of NAV's Scottish and Irish leadership team, and our role is to resource people in Scotland and Ireland to know Jesus, and just to use what we've received to bless others and help them to know him and to reach out. So whether that's in universities or places of work or families or neighborhoods. Yeah, and it's worth saying we're not all full-time Christian workers, and we're anxious to involve people who are not. And so just as we stop, if you're listening to this, we'd love to hear from you and include you if you're interested in what we do. So please get in touch if you're new to the NAVs. And I want to say, just on behalf of this team and the whole of the Scottish and Irish NAVs work, just a big thank you to those who put this together. So a big thank you, especially to, you haven't seen him, I don't think, but David Gibson has been the sort of linchpin in pulling this all together. It's been a huge amount of work in getting the technology right. Big thanks to Nathan and Martha for the quiz. It was wonderful. And also for Phil and for Solveig and Ben, because they've been the real kind of leadership team that have made things happen this week. And particularly to you, Ben, you've done a great job of organising these sessions. You've made it loads of fun. So yeah, well done. Thank you all. So I'm going to say goodbye, and I hope to see you all in person soon. Take care.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. Just a really helpful talk to tie things up this week. And here's your discussion questions. What or who do you find challenging, boring, or unnecessary evil? What does it really mean to live in the mercies of God? And how does that start to change these things? If these things are given, what is good about them and what enables you to engage them with thanks to God? How would your life be different if you were a true worshipper rather than a consumer worshipper? Yeah, so like Colin said, this is it from us. This is, of course, our last session. And yeah, just echo some of the things he said on behalf of all your ministry leaders here in Scotland. We're really glad you've been a part of this week. And if you're outside Scotland and have been able to join us, we're really pleased that you've been here. And we're all really encouraged by how things have been. A month ago, it was a question for us about whether we should put something like this on in place of summer school in Arbroath. And we're just really grateful for how it's gone and the response and you guys' enthusiasm. Let me recommend you in advance to get yourself to summer school next year. It's probably the best thing we do as navigators in Scotland. If you enjoyed this at all, I can promise you that you'll enjoy it even more in Arbroath. And if you didn't enjoy this at all, I can still promise you that you'll enjoy it even more in Arbroath. These streams will stay on YouTube if you ever want to go back and rewatch a talk, or if you want to share one of the talks with someone who you think might find it helpful. And in the comments, there should be pinned a Google form for feedback. I would really appreciate it if you could copy the link or open that up on a new tab and fill that out for us when you get a chance. And yeah, I was just going to say thank yous as well. If you just want to fill the chat with thank yous to the speakers who, like Colin and Tom and Judy and Phil and Roz and Darren, for all the time and preparation they've put into the content this week. And yeah, same as what Colin said, to Dave and Solveig for working alongside me, organising, executing this. And yeah, big thanks to Dave, who, because of him, all this runs so smoothly and looks so good. Great. So if you're in a Zoom discussion group, this isn't the end. There's your questions. Grab a snack or a hot drink and get into your Zooms by 11:55. That would be great. And if you're not in one of those Zoom discussion groups, then yeah, maybe you're reflecting on these on your own or discussing with somebody else. Thanks so much again, and goodbye. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We're really, really encouraged. See you later. Goodbye.
Streams make clouds, the city of our God, the city of our God. The nations rage and kingdoms will fall. He lifts up his voice and the earth melts. So come, behold the works of his hand. Silences wars and brings peace to earth. There is a river, streams make glad, the city of our God, the city of our God. God is within her, she will not be moved. His help comes at break of day. His help comes at break of day. Be still and know that he is God. He will be exalted. Be still and know that he is God. Be still and know that he is God. He will be exalted. Be still and know that he is God. Be still and know that he is God. He will be exalted. Be still and know that he is God. There is a river, streams make glad, the city of our God, the city of